Thank you all very much for coming to our security salon. My name is Ted Schlein. I'm a general partner at Kleiner Perkins Caulfield & Byers, and have been doing cybersecurity investing for about 20 years. And for the previous 10 years before that was at Symantec. I want to thank you all. Obviously, if anybody is at all interested in finding out how exploitable your companies are, that would be Jay. If anybody wants to stop all phishing attacks that ever occur, that would be Oren. And if anyone wants to hunt down what's not working in your networks and where the bad guys are in the networks, that would be Nate. Coming out of government and becoming an entrepreneur, what did you take from that? And how does it help you, especially, obviously this is a security conversation, so how has it helped you form some of your ideas and what you've done as an entrepreneur in the world of security, leveraging what you learned in government?
So from a business perspective, I think the government was a training ground on every possible way to not run a business. We did a complete 180, creating a culture that was very, very different than the one that we were inside of the government. Not to say that the place we worked wasn't really, really exciting, really fast-paced, a great mission, but I think at the end of the day, the way the bureaucracy, the ability to get things done, very, very difficult in a government environment and in a startup environment. Obviously, we want to move as fast as we can with as little bureaucracy as possible and just execute. And how did your TAO training help you with Synack? Yeah, so I mean, obviously TAO, like Ted alluded to, is an organization that I think is probably the most skilled group of folks in the world at penetrating foreign networks. And I think it gives you a very different perspective on how a state government or an advanced persistent threat, I was an advanced persistent threat, right? Would attempt to break into an application, a network, a piece of technology, whatever the mission might be. And I think it's a perspective that most people don't have in the world. And I think it gives you an ability to think outside of the box and come up with ways and solutions to defend against arguably the most difficult people to defend against. And should we even bother trying to protect against these people because it's just so hard? If anyone can do it, I think it's people coming out of these type of organizations.
An interesting thing about the security industry is, unlike any other industry, we're not just competing as businesses. We're actually competing against living, breathing human beings on the other side of the connection who are trying to do harm to us or to our customers. So, there's that adversarial nature that's part of it. So the whole mindset of turning the map around and thinking like the adversary, I never went out on a Marine mission where I didn't do that. Literally turn the map around and think about, okay, how are they looking at us right now? Mm-hmm. And I think that mindset is helpful in defense.
It's particularly helpful for what you're doing.
Yeah, and then the raw leadership stuff, right? I mean, the government's one of the rare places, I think, in our society where very young people get, positions of consequence. So,
yeah. And the consequences matter.
And they matter, right? You make decisions that have real impact on other people forever. Yeah.
So let's move to what you're seeing in the commercial world today. You guys are calling upon some of the largest companies in the country. If I'm trying to figure out if there's going to be a common thread, what you're being told by the CISOs or the folks in these companies that they're wrestling with, that they're dealing with, is kind of what's highest priority. And maybe it's different than what was highest priority last year. So I'm sort of curious as to what you're hearing is on people's minds the most.
Well, I might have selective hearing, but I hear from CISOs that phishing is the number one problem that they face. They recognize that 97% of the breaches that are reported kind of start with this user angle. But the second thing that I hear from them is they're very confused, right? And sort of to Jay's point, there's a lot of suggestions being made out there. There's a lot of jargon being used. There's an overuse of military or intelligence jargon that doesn't quite fit in the commercial space. And so, they're confused. It's hard to break through, but we find some really talented and dedicated people who are trying to protect their companies, protect all of us as consumers.
I think one of the biggest challenges that we have right now is just the huge talent gap. There simply are not enough information security professionals out there to defend the number of companies that are trying to defend themselves. That that's why we created our solution. Let's leverage the global mind share of top hackers all around the world, and let's couple them with technology to make them scale in a fundamentally different way. Even with that, you still need people in the organization to understand the data and the vulnerabilities and the exploit vectors that we're feeding to them, and they need to understand how to fix them. And I think until we really do a better job at educating a new workforce, or educating the workforce that we have in information security, developers, people who are sitting in the seats writing this code or deploying this infrastructure, we're going to continue to. This talent gap problem is never going to be solved.
I just want to chime in. I learned something interesting today. I think Jay's right. That's important. But I learned today that the gentleman who created the filament in the light bulb, that had he been a metallurgist, he would have not chosen that filament, right? And so I think there's a great risk at creating a vocational category of cybersecurity where people have a very monolithic view about the problem. This is a really challenging problem because it's a data problem, right? It's a networking problem, it's a cryptography, that part of the security problem. And so you just need to make sure that we're just bringing smart people who can think differently about this, and it's not all one playbook.
I hear a couple of things. Real vendor fatigue, in the sense that there are so many point solutions. You walk into a big enterprise and they have 300 products deployed. And so, complexity is the enemy of security. And so there seems to be a need for some sort of, some better integration or consolidation. And second, I think a lot of people are tired of passivity, dissatisfied with passivity, but what does a more proactive approach look like? And that's not yet very well articulated.
Is there a particular reason why you think they've continued to get better and better? Are these nation states just investing heavily in the area?
They have to, right? I mean, that's their mission. They have almost unlimited budget. They have incredible resources from a people perspective. Some of the smartest people I've ever worked with. They have, infrastructure that supercomputers that are unlike anything we've seen before.
I think it's more about effectiveness, right? And how ineffective security solutions are at stopping the problem. And I can give you a couple examples. I'm almost amazed when people kind of take that position that attackers are so sophisticated for three reasons. One, I mean, Jay and I used to be these people, right? And we're, look at us, right? The second is, Ted, if I was to tell you that I'm going to cut you open, grab your heart, rip it out of your chest, and replace it with a pig heart, because you're having some coronary disease, and then send you home 2 days later, you'd think, no problem, right? That sounds pretty reasonable. Guys could rip my heart out, and we're going to do this. But for some reason, a bunch of guys in the Ukraine or, contractors for the Chinese government are, causing havoc, for our government. The history of mankind, we have solved way harder problems than this, sending man to the moon, adding cotton swabs on the end of Q-tips, the thermos, right? There's lots of examples of really great technical innovation. So, I think that they're very effective, but I don't think that it's raw skill that's the challenge.
Let's talk about proactive versus, you're right, a lot in the security world has been very defensive. Let's wait till something bad happens and I'm going to try and protect myself from that. And then we got a lot of information that sort of says, well, that didn't work out so well, since the average length of a breach was in your organization about 220 days, and everyone's been breached. So now there's this move towards let's be proactive. What does that mean to each of you? What does it mean to be proactive?
Well, that's kind of fundamentally what we're doing. So how do you hunt? How do you take so all the offensive capability minus the exploit, because you already have access, and hunt very proactively across some segment of your network on the assumption that they're there, and do it in a way that brings to bear some of the attributes of offense. Do it stealthily. Recognize that kind of loud and proud doesn't work. The adversary's moving around you and adapting. So I think stealthy hunting and finding a way over time to increasingly automate that is, there's no silver bullet here, but I think it's one of the proverbial 1,000 lead bullets that we need.
Well, look, for years, people have been building this DMZ perimeter around their enterprise network. And retreating further into that and looking further within your own network is that. It's retreating and it's not being proactive, it's going the opposite way. We need to take that line of demarcation and push it forward. It's why we have troops in Korea, right? And we don't wait to engage in battles, just here on our own soil. And so, the internet is it's a vast place, but the way to be preventive is to go out to where the attackers are and not to wait for them to come here and kind of fight that, and to create a smaller and smaller and smaller concentric circle where when you're finding it, by definition, it's already too late.
So you're taking the fight to the bad guy. You're pushing the DMZ out.
Well, I think it's changing the way you view it, and it's that everyone is looking inwards and what's happening within my own sphere, and it's saying, no, let's look out. What are the bad guys doing out there? These attacks are two-sided conversations, right? And we're only listening to one side of the telephone call. There's a guy that's picking up the call and just war dialing all over the place, and that's very informative and creates a lot of small patterns that can be used.
I mean, obviously, we're in the business of being proactive from the standpoint of let's proactively find security holes and vulnerabilities and let's plug them before they're taken advantage of. Commonly you hear the analogy of an M&M is very analogous to an enterprise network, right? You have a crunchy outside, hard outside, and you have the soft inside, and make sure that outside is as hard as possible. And I actually agree with that analogy. I think that outside has to be have no imperfections in it whatsoever, which is a really hard thing to do because our attack surface is getting more and more vast. It's getting larger, complex, and without appropriate resources, without appropriate technology, being proactive about keeping people out in the first place becomes very, very difficult, especially when you have people on the inside who start extending that almost DMZ because they open emails in the form of phishing attacks. I mean, I think that's,
Yeah, I mean, look, if our network was an M&M, right, it'd be one that people have stepped on, right? And it's totally shattered because I don't know about you guys, but we don't have any infrastructure at my company. Most of the companies that we talk to are almost 100% cloud or moving that direction. So, I mean, it's impossible to create this sort of bubble around yourself or to walk around like that. The reality is that people want their data anytime, any place, on any device. You have to work through a lot of third-party solutions. And they're great solutions. They're efficient and they offer us new capabilities. But, you got to be out there.
Actually, that's interesting. The cloud, and the move to the cloud, is that a benefit to security practitioners or a huge pain in the ass and a bigger headache?
Benefit.
Huge benefit.
I think a benefit as well. You're putting the onus on an organization who is so much more capable and has so many more security resources than you do as a small company or even a large enterprise to protect that overarching infrastructure behind the cloud, that it just makes it much easier to adopt.
Are you making an assumption somebody's 100% cloud? So now I got a public cloud, I got my private cloud, I got my data center, I got all my, this is what reality is. It's going to be this hodgepodge of stuff. Yeah. Now answer the question, is that helpful or less helpful?
I don't know. I used to have a boss, at NSA, and he would say to me, Oren, all this classified data, we made it that way, right? It existed on the internet before we kind of built our thing. I'm not sure that people have ever been 100% private. They might think they have been, but it's our nature to trade data and to have information to flow. Once you're connected, it's out there.
And maybe another benefit, I mean, there's a real neighborhood watch effect here that matters, and the cloud migration just makes it easier to share threat data and move fast. Mm-hmm. In a nutshell, I don't think they're as good as we writ large. There's this perception that they are for a few reasons. One is our government's not very good at talking about how good guys like these two and their counterparts who are still in are. We don't talk about it. Ash Carter's changing that, but we generally don't talk about it. Two, it's really easy to sow chaos. It's hard to maintain order. So offense is structurally dominant. A dollar of offense beats a dollar of defense every time. And so, they have an easier job. The attackers have an easier job than the defenders. And third, I can't remember third. So, see, that was a knuckle dragger.
I mean, I think the kind of third part, though, is every attack that I've ever been a part of or ever heard of, it gets caught, right? It makes it in a newspaper. Kim writes about these things in books and others. And so, I think the facts are not on the side of the attacker. They're on the side of them being caught. And the question is, how fast can you do that? Or can you preempt them and anticipate them in ways? And I think what we've seen from personal experience and from what we do in a professional setting is that the attackers, they reuse infrastructure, they reuse tools, they're still sending porn to people to get them to click on links. Everything about these attacks is generic, but our response is more hyperbolic.
I think the biggest challenge, though, from a defense standpoint, is that it really only takes one hole, one person opening an email, one vulnerability in a piece of technology, for someone to completely own an entire network. And I think that's the systemic problem. I think, an attacker, obviously, just given that knowledge alone, has a much easier time than someone on the defensive side.
An interesting topic that's been bouncing around right now, it has to do with encryption and backdoors, and given the government the ability to have access to communications through as I said, an encryption backdoor. I am curious about this group's opinion about the topic, and then maybe we talk a little bit about, let's get your opinions first, then I'll tell you what we're going to talk about in a second. But
I mean, I think it's as good an idea as jean shorts, Ted, which is not a good idea, right, to be honest with you. Look, I went to
you
work.
had a pair of jean shorts at some point.
They were cool one day. And I come from it from a different angle in the sense that I went to work for the government because they solve really hard problems. Built the internet, sent a man to the moon, does incredible things, and there's a better way, right? And if anything we've learned over the last year of leaks is that there's some clever folks in there, and I think it's sort of a cheap shot to ask for backdoors,
So I met last week with a group of Senate staffers who were setting up a task force, blah, 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 right? Following up on an op-ed by a couple of senators in the Washington Post. And I had to work really hard to fill the hour that we had allotted, because I think it's actually pretty simple. And our company is in DC and in San Francisco, and so we live this schizophrenia every day. And DC, the policy world generally sees the world in normative terms. That is, what should happen, what is the world we want to be, and that's great. Like it's aspirational, it's very noble, but the technology world technologists generally see the world in positive terms. Not what should happen, but what will happen, what's going to happen, what's possible. And so, in my view, the encryption horse has already left the barn. Like, it is possible, and therefore it will be, and the government needs to learn to function in a world, law enforcement, intelligence agencies need to learn to function in a world where everybody's going to have access to end-to-end encryption. And the longer they resist that reality, the more damage they do in their thrashing to this relationship that really matters.
I mean, I certainly have an appreciation working in the counterterrorism mission for understanding why backdoors and being able to see data in transit is so important. But at the same time, I just see no world where we can insert a method for the government to gain access to things through a backdoor that an adversary wouldn't be able to take advantage of. I just don't think it's technically possible. I think as soon as you open up one hole, it's game over at some point, and you might not even know that someone found out about it or figured it out. It just is Oren's right, it's as bad of an idea as jean shorts.
So, So let's say we're on agreement that this is a bad idea, but our friends in the government would like a good idea. Does anybody have a good idea to help them out?
We should be doing everything to make the internet as safe as possible. And if encryption is, end-to-end encryption is something that secures the billions or trillions of transactions that are made across the internet for commerce, that's a form of national security. If it's supporting, there's a reason that the president, when he picks up the phone, uses a type 1 encryption so nobody can listen to him, right? The government has found its own need to secure communications, and there's no reason that individuals shouldn't have those same rights.
So terrorists using some of this information, terrorists using the internet for their own purview.
I'll tell you what I told the Senate committee. I don't have there isn't a technology solution to this problem for you. Our human intelligence capability sucks. We live in a monolingual society, and nobody who has a foreign friend can get a security clearance. Like, that's ridiculous. So we need to vastly improve our human intelligence capability and think about, okay, great. So the attackers in Paris are communicating via encrypted communications. Well, we need to bring other instruments of power and allies and other things to bear in order to stay on top of that.
Look, in almost every scenario that I saw within the government where a bad guy does something to protect themselves, they reveal themselves at the same time. Sure, it's a pain. If someone takes a Thuraya handset, right, which are these sort of fancy sat phone things, and then they add a voice modulator on it so you can't do voice recognition against it. Well, the reality is, across the billions of phone calls that exist on the planet, they're the 10 dudes that sound like Donald Duck, and they're pretty easy to put together in a group. And so time and time again, when people try to abstract their human behavior, they reveal themselves in ways that they can't anticipate. And so it'd be helpful to see these things. I'm sensitive to that part of the government's mission, but what's more important is that we don't degrade the integrity of the web, and that all of us get to benefit from having secure and private communications.
If you're looking for every person who works for the government, just check out the credit monitoring agency that the government hired after the breach of all the clearance data, right? We once lived in a world where the internet didn't exist, and we were pretty blind to communications, and we were reliant on other factors. Humans is obviously a key component of that. I think we need to start thinking outside of the box, and just realizing that we are going to have to accept the fact that the internet is going to be secure, and people are going to practice encryption.
All right.
But I guess, just one last thing. If we've learned any, I'm surprised by this, because if we've learned anything, right, in post-Snowden leaks, it's that all these technologies are fundamentally flawed. So, there's been major SSL vulnerabilities floating around the internet for years. I mean, Juniper and other security companies have had major vulnerabilities in their technologies that have been revealed in the last couple of months. So I think we know that when humans create these technologies, they're imperfect by nature. So, I think people will figure out a way to kind of pick it.
I think there's going to be a point where it's not going to be possible.
Where do you see the threat landscape over the next 10 years, and how do your companies, and by the way, I would just broaden that to sort of say any new technologies you can see on the horizon to try and deal with those threat landscapes, I think everyone would find interesting as well. So
we're gonna wake up in 5 years, and people are gonna stop talking about the fact that they've been breached, and they're gonna be talking about the fact that they're now taking back control and are protecting themselves, and they're going to be focused on a different problem.
What technologies will continue to evolve or develop to make your reality reality?
I actually think there's going to be a complete re-architecture of how businesses transact online that make it feasible to trust the communication protocols of anyone sending traffic inside of a network, outside of a network. I think it's a necessity at this point. I don't think that we can ever completely solve the cybersecurity problem without starting from the ground up. I think until we get there, there's a variety of solutions that we're going to focus on. Obviously, looking outside of the box for vulnerability discovery, phishing, being more offensive, and taking a look at yourself from an adversarial view. I think those are really important things, and I think those are going to continue through the next 5 years, but between 5 and 10 years, the internet's going to look completely different in my eyes. And I think I kind of agree with Oren. I think we're going to live in a world where security will not necessarily be, it's still going to be very important and a necessity, but we're going to stop talking about breaches occurring every single day.
So I think the threat landscape is going to get more varied because the barriers to entry are going to get lower. It's going to become easier and easier to achieve high-end capability for less money. But that's only half the equation. The other half, we're in an arms race here, right? So, higher ladders, higher walls, higher ladders, higher walls. And I think that there's a dawning realization, even inside the government, even inside the offensive community in the government, that we can do as much damage to our adversaries via good defense as we can via effective offense.
I think we'll get better, but I don't think we're going to get to your nirvana, Oren, in the next 5 years. I think possibly breaches won't be as topical because it'll have happened so often. And we all kind of know it's not really the breach that's the issue. It's what's done with the information that's been breached is actually the issue. And you might start to learn more about those implications, and that might be the topic versus the actual breach itself. But hey, this brings up an interesting question. You got nation states attacking private enterprise here. Is it reasonable to expect that private enterprises should be able to defend themselves against nation states? But whether it be technically with the manpower, the know-how, or not? Or how do we deal with it? Nate, go ahead.
So, I guess philosophically, I think we pay taxes fundamentally to have a government that protects us not from ourselves but from other people. So, I don't want to live in a society where, after 9/11, everybody with a pitchfork marches off to Afghanistan. I want to live in a society where the government has a monopoly on the legitimate use of force. So, I think private enterprises in this country do have a right to have some sort of governmental top cover. And just from a business standpoint, you can go crazy and broke defending against every possible threat out there in the world. But if it's not a risk to your business, then you shouldn't.
You guys differ?
Well, I'm always cautious about the expansive role of government.
That's a narrowly defined role.
Right.
Defense.
But
this sticker that Oren gave me, make the internet great again.
That's stole my joke, Nate.
Sorry. But I credited you.
That's okay. I think that what the facts show is that the vast majority of attacks start through often very simple ways, right? And that's not the place of the government to step in when people are not using two-factor authentication, when users are being driven to click on things, or things aren't being patched and anticipated. That's basic hygiene. There's some level of responsibility when you're dealing with billions of credit card transactions, when you're dealing with large financial sums.
But
that's not
whether
nuclear,
you lock
right?
your door or not and somebody breaks into your house and steals something, you think that maybe the police should intervene only if your doors were locked, but if you happen to leave your doors unlocked, they shouldn't care because you didn't do good hygiene?
Well, what you're describing is the difference between a world where people the government preempts, it's the Minority Report, or the government is there to investigate crimes, right? And we're suggesting is that our business in making the internet great again is to create a fabric, where people can be protected, where they don't have to live in fear. Last year, half of the United States of America individuals lost some form of personally identifiable information, and the response from vendors is, here's 30 days of free credit monitoring. Sorry, dude, right? Here's a new credit card number, which you pay for in fees, later down the road. That's kind of a lame response, in my opinion, and I think companies are responsible.
Do you believe knowing who attacked matters? And obviously, if you're going to fight back, you got to know who to fight back to. But how important is it to know who's really attacking you and why? A lot of people hide behind the whole attribution thing. So
I think it would be a great thing, but I think it's an impossible task. Attribution is just impossible on the internet.
I think that we talk with hundreds of people every year who have been breached, and their response often is, "Man, why did this happen?" Right? And they're kind of searching for that question. So it's very natural for leaders to ask that question, sort of who, where, when, and why. But fundamentally, understanding who did it, certainly at a personal level, at an organizational level, maybe at a country level, it's something different. But it doesn't change the outcome, right? And if you want to change outcomes and protect yourself, doing analysis of who the actors and their motivations, that's an impossible task and very unuseful.
I think it matters a lot for the government when, after an attack on a movie studio, you have the President of the United States standing up and vowing retribution. You better know who he's about to hit, right? So, if there's any deterrence that's going to work here, if we're going to use different instruments of national power, attribution has to matter at the governmental level. I just think for most businesses, it's kind of irrelevant. You got to take the hit, adapt, and move on, and it's a lot less important.
But I really appreciate the fun discourse, and let's make the internet great again.